The metal gates of the Somerville Correctional Facility for Women slowly opened with a distinctive rattle that Renee Freeman had only heard upon her arrival 4 years ago. Since then, she hadn't had to leave the prison grounds, not for visits with relatives, of which she had virtually none, nor for the medical procedures that took place in the prison infirmary. Renee took a deep breath of the fresh June air. At 32, she was free again. In her hand was a shabby backpack with the few belongings she had collected over the years. A few books, photographs, cheap jewelry made in the prison workshop. Parole papers for good behavior were in the inside pocket of an old denim jacket. The woman paused for a moment, squinting against the bright sunlight. In 4 years, the world outside had changed, or had she changed herself? Prison had made her tougher, more cynical, taught her how to survive in an environment where trust could cost lives. But despite this, there was hope inside for a new beginning. A city bus was waiting for her at the bus stop outside the prison. Renee had given no warning of her release. And who was there to warn? Her mother had died before her incarceration. She had never known her father, and she had no close friends left. There was only Andre, the guy she dated before she was arrested, the same one who convinced her to help distribute drugs, promising easy money and a carefree life, the same one who'd set her up when the heat was on. On the bus, Renee sat by the window and stared silently at the scenery passing by. Somerville hadn't changed. The same dilapidated houses on the outskirts, the bright store signs in the center, the parks with neatly trimmed lawns in the wealthy neighborhoods, the contrasts she'd been used to since childhood. The bus stopped on the main street, and Renee got off without a clear plan of where to go next. Under the terms of her parole, she was supposed to live in an ex-convict rehabilitation center on the east side of the city. But there were still a few hours before her meeting with her handler, so she decided to take a walk. The first thing Renee did was to stop at a small cafe. A simple cup of real coffee seemed like an unbelievable luxury after the prison booze. She ordered a large latte and a sandwich, spending almost half of the small amount she'd been given on her release. "Keep the change," she said to the young barista, who raised his eyebrows in surprise but nodded gratefully. Renee chose a table in the corner, where she had a good view of the whole room. It was a habit, developed over years in prison, to always be aware of what was going on around her and to have an escape route. The taste of real coffee brought tears to her eyes, the little joys of a free life she had dreamed of for so long in her cell. She ate the sandwich slowly, stretching the pleasure, watching the customers. Young men with the latest model cell phones, businesswomen in strict suits, older couples holding hands. The ordinary life she had been cut off from for 4 years. After the cafe, Renee went to the rehabilitation center. The red brick building looked dreary but clean. Inside, she was greeted by the social worker, a full, dark-skinned, middle-aged woman with a friendly smile and tired eyes. "Welcome, Ms. Freeman. My name is Sharon Williams, and I'll be your handler. Let me show you to your room and tell you about the house rules." The room was small but tidy. A narrow bed, a closet, a desk with a chair and a nightstand. A room of one's own seemed an incredible luxury after the crowded cell. "Tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, you have a mandatory medical examination at the city clinic," Sharon said, handing Renee a folder of documents. "It's standard procedure for all participants in the rehabilitation program. The clinic address and doctor's name are on the paperwork. You'll also need to meet with your parole officer on Wednesday. And don't forget you have to attend group sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Renee nodded, absent-mindedly thumbing through the papers. All these rules and restrictions were like prison, but with a little bit of freedom. "Thank you, Ms. Williams. I'll abide by all the conditions." When the curator left, Renee collapsed on the bed and allowed herself to relax for the first time all day. Freedom was not what she had imagined. Instead of euphoria, there was fatigue and uncertainty. What was next for her? Would she be able to find a job with a criminal record? How would people treat an ex-convict? Renee pulled out of her backpack a shabby photo of her and Andre laughing, embracing, against a lake. The picture had been taken a month before her arrest. Back then, she had truly believed they would be together forever. Andre had promised to wait, to write, to visit. But after a few months of occasional letters, communication broke down. She learned from a cellmate whose brother knew Andre that he quickly found a replacement for her and continued his business. The photo went in the trash. The past must be left behind. In the morning, Renee woke up early, a habit developed over years in prison, where the day started at 6 in the morning. She showered, put on clean clothes from the few clothes she had been given at the center, and walked to the city clinic. The clinic building was new and modern, one of the few in Somerville built in recent years. Inside, it smelled of antiseptic and fresh paint. Renee walked up to the front desk and presented her referral. "Dr. Ellis will see you in 15 minutes, the nurse said without looking up from her computer. "Wait in the hallway, you'll be paged." Renee sat down on a plastic chair and flipped through an old journal, trying not to think about the exam she was about to undergo. The last time she had been examined was when she was admitted to the prison. Since then, she'd only had a cold a couple times, which was treated in the prison infirmary with minimal medication. "Renee Freeman?" A voice came from the office. "Come in, please." Dr. Tamara Ellis was a slender, dark-skinned woman of about 37, with a short haircut and attentive brown eyes. She gestured Renee to a chair near her desk. "So, Ms. Freeman, I see you've recently been released and are undergoing a routine medical checkup. How are you feeling overall?" "I'm fine," Renee replied briefly, unaccustomed to being cared for. "Good. We'll need to run a standard set of tests. First, a general examination, then blood tests, urine tests, fluoroscopy. That should take about an hour. Any health complaints?" Renee shook her head. The doctor wrote something down on the chart and began the examination. She took her blood pressure, temperature, listened to her lungs, checked her reflexes. Then the nurse took Renee to get some tests and a fluoroscopy. "The results will be ready in 3 days," Dr. Ellis said when all the procedures were completed. "Come back on Thursday at the same time. If you feel any discomfort before then, please come right away." Renee spent the next few days adjusting to her new life. She attended the mandatory rehabilitation group meeting, where ex-prisoners shared their stories and problems of adaptation. She met with the parole officer, a stern woman who explained at length what would happen if Renee violated the terms of her release. On Thursday, she went to the clinic again. This time there was an unusual atmosphere in Dr. Ellis's office. The doctor looked tense, avoiding a direct gaze. "Have a seat, Ms. Freeman," she said in an unusually formal tone. "I have your test results." Renee tensed. Something was wrong. Most of them are normal, but there's one problem we need to talk about, Dr. Ellis continued, going through the papers on her desk. "Your HIV test came back positive." The words sounded like a gunshot. Renee felt the ground slipping away from under her feet. It's a mistake," she whispered. "I can't be." "We ran a second test to confirm," the doctor replied softly. "The result is the same. I'm so sorry." Renee's head rumbled. HIV. 3 letters that wiped out all plans for the future, all the hopes she'd cherished in prison. When could I have gotten infected?" she asked, feeling nausea rising in her throat. "It's hard to say for sure. You could have been infected years before you showed symptoms. Considering the last test you took when you entered the correctional facility 4 years ago, and it was negative, the infection occurred during that period." Renee froze, digesting the information. She thought back to her life in prison. She didn't do drugs, she didn't get tattoos. The only other possibility was that she had been raped by one of the guards, Leroy Wilson, who often molested inmates. She hadn't told anyone about it, fearing they wouldn't believe her or that it would affect her chances of parole. "It's important to start treatment now." Dr. Ellis's voice brought her back to reality. "With modern antiretroviral therapy, you can control the virus and live a full life. We'll make a treatment plan." Renee listened, half listening. One thought was forming in her mind: revenge, not only to Wilson, who had probably infected her, but also to those who had brought her to prison. Andre, who had set her up. Malik, who knew of Andre's plans and remained silent. "Doctor," she interrupted Ellis's explanation, "in prison, is there any chance of infection from another person? Violently?" Dr. Ellis stopped talking, looking at Renee carefully. "Are you talking about sexual assault?" she asked cautiously. Renee nodded slowly. "Yes, that is a possible route of transmission. If there was an assault and the attacker had the virus..." The doctor didn't finish her sentence, but it was clear. "And how can I find out exactly who infected me?" Renee asked, trying to control her voice. It's difficult to determine. You can determine the approximate time of infection by the state of your immune system, but it's almost impossible to say exactly who infected you without genetic analysis of the virus in potential sources. Renee exhaled slowly. She knew who it was. Leroy Wilson, the guard who had taken advantage of his position and her defenselessness. But he wasn't the only one to blame for her situation. If it wasn't for Andre, she never would have ended up in prison. If it hadn't been for Malik, who knew of his friend's plans to frame her but kept silent, she might have avoided arrest. "Minus Ms. Freeman," the doctor said softly, seeing Renee's detached look. "I realize you're in shock right now. It's a normal reaction. Would you like me to refer you to a counselor? We have a support group for people with HIV. "No," Renee replied sharply. "I can manage on my own." She stood up and headed for the door. "Minus Ms. Freeman, at least take the information brochures, doctor." Ellis handed her some pamphlets. "And here's a prescription for an initial course of medication. Come back in a week for a follow-up. It's very important not to interrupt the treatment." Renee mechanically took the papers and left the office. She spent the rest of the day in her room at the rehabilitation center, lying on the bed and looking at the ceiling. Her thoughts revolved around one thing: how her life had gone down the drain because of the decisions and actions of others. By late afternoon, shock had been replaced by rage. Renee pulled out a notebook and started writing names. Andre Jackson, her ex-boyfriend who set her up with drugs, sending her to prison where she was abused. Malik Turner, Andre's friend who knew about the plans to set her up but didn't warn her. And Leroy Wilson, the prison guard who directly infected her during the abuse. 3 names, 3 people who had made her life a living hell. The next day, Renee went to the library. She spent several hours on the computer, researching information about HIV, how it is contracted, the period when a person can transmit the virus without knowing their status. Then she moved on to finding information about her potential victims. Andre was the easiest to find. He had always loved social media and didn't hide his life much. Judging by the photos, he was still living in Somerville, still doing his shady business and dating a new girl, a young, naive beauty who probably didn't know what she'd signed up for. Leroy Wilson was more complicated. There was little information about him in the public domain. Renee only learned that he'd quit the penitentiary 2 years ago and supposedly still lived in Somerville. Malik Turner left the most visible digital footprint. He'd opened a small bar on the south side of town, judging by his social media profile, and it seemed his life had gotten better after a dark past. Renee made a plan. It was to start with Andre, the man who had indirectly caused her infection by sending her to prison. That evening, she went to the neighborhood where, according to social media, Andre frequented. A small bar on the corner of Maple Street and 42nd Avenue, known as a gathering place for small dealers and their customers. Renee dressed casually: jeans, a dark t-shirt, a baseball cap that hid her face. She took a table in the far corner of the bar, ordered a non-alcoholic cocktail, and waited. The wait was justified. An hour later, Andre walked into the bar. He hadn't changed much in 4 years. The same dreadlocks and a ponytail, the same confident gait, the same ring with a large stone on his pinky finger. Renee instinctively squirmed in her chair, though it was hard to recognize her in the semi-darkness of the bar. Andre sat down at a table with 2 men Renee didn't know. They were talking animatedly about something, occasionally laughing and patting each other on the shoulders. Ordinary guys discussing ordinary things. No one would have guessed they were discussing drug shipments and distribution territories. Renee watched Andre for almost 2 hours. During that time, she recognized his route. After the bar, he headed to his car parked in an alley and drove to an apartment building on the east side of town. She had memorized the address. In the days that followed, Renee continued to follow Andre, studying his habits, his routes, his social circle. She learned that every Friday he drove to the country club, returning late at night on a deserted road through the woods, the perfect place for an ambush. The plan came together quickly. Renee bought a knife, gloves, and dark clothing at the hardware store. She studied the bus schedules that ran near the country club and worked out an escape route. It had to look like a robbery gone wrong or a showdown between dealers. Friday night, Renee told her handler at the rehab center that she wasn't feeling well and would go to bed early. As soon as the footsteps died down in the hallway, she changed into dark clothes, stashed the knife in her backpack, and slipped out the back exit. The bus took her to the turnoff for the country club. Renee walked the rest of the way, keeping to the shade of the trees along the road. She chose a place to ambush her, a slight bend in the road where cars were forced to slow down, and a dark stretch with no streetlights. Sitting in the bushes, Renee thought about her diagnosis, her ruined life, Andre's betrayal. The anger she'd been holding back for the past few days flared with renewed vigor. HIV, a stigma for the rest of her life. A stigma that would forever change her relationships with people, her plans, her future. Time stretched slowly. Renee checked her phone almost midnight. Andre was supposed to show up any minute, unless his habits had changed. She gripped the handle of the knife tighter, feeling her pulse quicken. In the stillness of the night came the sound of an approaching car. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, and Renee recognized Andre's car, the same black sedan with tinted windows she'd seen outside his house. It was time. Renee stepped into the driveway as Andre's car began to slow down on the curve. She mimed voting, raising her arm and limping slightly as if she'd hurt her leg. She kept her face in shadow, pulling her hood up. Andre slowed down, and in the headlights, Renee could see the curiosity and wariness on his face. He rolled down his window but kept the engine running. "Hey, pretty girl, is there a problem?" he asked, peering wearily into the darkness. "Car broke down a couple miles from here," Renee answered, her voice changing. "My cell phone's dead. Can you give me a ride into town?" Andre hesitated for a few seconds. In another situation, he probably would have passed by, but the deserted road and the lone woman with an attractive figure piqued his interest. "Hop in." He unlocked the passenger door. "Don't be silly. I've had a rough day." Renee slid into the seat, trying not to look directly at Andre. She could smell him, the same mixture of expensive cologne and the light scent of marijuana she remembered from their previous encounters. "Where are you going?" Andre asked, pulling out of his seat. "To the center, if possible," she answered, simultaneously fumbling for the knife in her jacket pocket. "Although, there is a place closer. It's quiet there. We can talk." Andre grinned, interpreting her suggestion in his own way. "Talk, you mean?" He turned to a forest road, which Renee had noticed during the preparation. "I know a good place." The car went deeper into the woods, following a dirt road. After a couple minutes, Andre stopped in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. The location was perfect. No passing car would notice them. "So beautiful," Andre turned to her, finally turning off the engine. "Let's get to know each other, shall we?" Renee slowly removed her hood, looking straight into her ex-boyfriend's eyes. Recognition didn't come immediately. He blinked a few times, as if he'd seen a ghost. "Renee?" he said incredulously. "What the hell? You're in jail?" She finished for him. "I was. Got out early for good behavior. Surprised to see me alive, huh?" Andre got nervous. His hand reached for the doorknob. "Look, I'm glad to see you, but I gotta go. It's late and—" "Take your time." Renee put her hand on his shoulder. Don't you want to know how I've lived these 4 years? While you were having fun with new girls and continuing your business?" There was a steel in her voice that Andre had never heard before. He froze, instinctively sensing danger. "Renee, baby, you know how it is. Life goes on. I wrote to you at first, but then you forgot about me," Renee interrupted him. "Just like you forgot you set me up. Or are you saying you didn't tell the police about the party at my apartment? You didn't plan it so that I would take the blame for you? What are you talking about?" Andre tried to feign incomprehension, but his eyes betrayed panic. "I didn't set anyone up. We just got caught up, and you were in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Liar!" Renee pulled out a knife and pointed it at Andre. "The cellmate told me everything. Her brother heard you bragging about how you managed to stay clean by framing your girlfriend." Andre raised his hands in a protective gesture, his eyes widening with fear. "Renee, I swear it's not true. Somebody's putting me on the spot. I would never—" "4 years, Andre." Her voice shook with rage. 4 years of my life. And do you know what happened to me there? One of the guards raped me, and I got HIV. All because of you." Andre froze for a moment, realizing what he'd just said. "Oh my God, Renee, I'm so sorry. I didn't know, but I swear I didn't set you up. It's too late for excuses." Renee swung the knife, and the first blow hit Andre in the shoulder. He screamed and tried to push her away, but Renee was stronger. Years in prison had hardened her. She threw another blow, this time aiming for his chest. The struggle didn't last long. Andre, blinded by pain and fear, could not fight back effectively. When the knife entered his heart, his eyes widened in surprise, as if he hadn't believed until the last moment that this was happening to him. "There's a price to pay for everything," Renee whispered, watching the life leave the eyes of the man she had once loved. She wiped the knife on his shirt and looked around. She needed to leave, but first she had to make sure she hadn't left any clues. Renee searched Andre's pockets, taking his phone and wallet. It had to look like a robbery. Then she wiped down everything she touched in the car. Before leaving, she took a small red bow out of her pocket, a symbol of HIV awareness, and pinned it to Andre's shirt. This sign was to be her signature, a message to the police about her motive for revenge. As she got out of the car, she took one last look at Andre's body. No regrets, only cold satisfaction. The first on her list had gotten what he deserved. Renee disappeared into the woods, following a pre-learned route to the nearest bus stop. An hour later, she was in her room at the rehab center, washing invisible traces of blood off her hands. Andre Jackson's body was discovered in the early morning hours. A patrolling police officer spotted the strangely parked car while circling a wooded area used by local couples. Detectives Elijah Baxter and Keyshawn Miller arrived on the scene as the medical examiner was already examining the body. Baxter, an experienced dark-skinned man of 45, immediately assessed the situation as more than a simple robbery. "What do you think?" he asked his young partner, standing at the tape of the cordon. Keyshawn Miller, a 29-year-old detective with an excellent record, scrutinized the scene. "Too much blood for a simple robbery," he observed. "The blows were delivered with force and fury. It's personal." Baxter nodded, agreeing with the conclusion. "Has the victim been identified yet?" he asked a forensic scientist who was photographing footprints around the car. "The paperwork in the glove compartment says Andre Jackson, 34 years old, local resident. Cars registered in his name." "Jackson," Baxter said thoughtfully. "That name sounds familiar. Run him through the database, Keyshawn." Miller quickly ran the name through the tablet. "He's got a few priors for drug possession and distribution, but no serious charges. Typical small-time dealer." Detectives approached the body as the ME finished his preliminary exam. "Multiple stab wounds," the examiner said, pulling off his gloves. "The primary cause of death is a blow to the heart. Judging by the position of the body and the blood spatter, the attack took place inside the car. Time of death between midnight and 2 a.m. "Did he have valuables on him?" Baxter asked. "No cell phone, no wallet." but there was an expensive ring and a watch. If this is a robbery, it's a strange one. Baxter examined the interior of the car. Blood spatter on the dashboard, seats, and doors spoke of a violent struggle. No sign of forced entry, he observed. The victim probably knew her attacker or willingly let him into the car. Or her, Miller added, pointing to a long, dark hair on the passenger seat. Forensics will take it away for DNA testing. Baxter noticed an unusual red bow pinned to the victim's shirt. "What's that?" he asked the examiner, pointing to the bow. "It looks like a symbol of HIV awareness," he replied. "Strange to see it here. Maybe a personal item of the victim?" Miller suggested. "Maybe," Baxter nodded. "But it could also be a message from the killer. We need to see if Jackson was HIV positive." When the initial examination was completed, the detectives set out to interview possible witnesses. The first stop was the country club where Andre had spent the night before his death. "Yeah, he was here," the bartender confirmed, looking over the list of patrons. "Came in around 9, left after midnight. Sat with a couple of friends, drank a lot, but there were no conflicts." "Are these friends still here?" Miller asked. "No, they left with him. We're going to need their names and contacts." Back at the station, the detectives began to compile a list of people to talk to. Andre's friends from the club, his girlfriend, neighbors, other dealers he might have clashed with. "What's the motive?" Baxter pondered aloud, looking at the board of crime scene photos. "If not a simple robbery, what? Competition for territory? Debts? Personal vendetta?" "We'll have to wait for the autopsy results," Miller said. "Maybe they'll give us more information." The autopsy results came back the next day, and they put an unexpected twist on the investigation. The victim was perfectly healthy, the medical examiner reported by phone. No signs of HIV or other serious illnesses. Baxter tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. So the red bow was not his personal item, but a message from the killer. But what kind of message? Maybe someone thought Jackson was HIV positive, Miller suggested. Or was the killer infected himself and blaming the victim? See if Jackson had any conflicts along those lines. Talk to his girlfriend. See if he had any ex-partners with HIV. Andre's girlfriend, a young waitress named Yasmin, was shocked by the news of his death. "I can't believe someone could do this to him," she cried in the interrogation room. "He was a good man, despite his activities." "Did Andre have any enemies?" Miller asked when the girl had calmed down a bit. "Anyone who might have wished him harm?" "In his business, everyone has enemies," Yasmin replied. "But I don't know anyone who hates him that much." "What about ex-girlfriends? Maybe someone who had recently gotten in touch," Yasmin wondered. "He never talked about his exes. I only know he had a serious relationship with some girl who went to prison, but that was a long time ago." "You don't remember her name?" Baxter asked. "Renee, I think?" "Yes, Renee. He mentioned her once when he was drunk. Said he was sorry about the way things turned out. That information led detectives to check the lists of recently released inmates. Among them, they found the name of Renee Freeman, who served 4 years for accessory to drug distribution and was released just 2 weeks ago. There was information in her file about an affair with Andre Jackson. "Now that's interesting," Baxter said, studying the file. "Ex-girlfriend, just out of prison. Motive, he dumped her while she was in prison." "And there's something else," Miller added, looking through the files. "The file shows that when Freeman was arrested, she claimed the drugs didn't belong to her, but to Jackson. She said he set her up." "Check to see if she's been medically cleared since her release," Baxter ordered. "If she has HIV, that might explain the red bow." Miller contacted the city clinic, but was denied medical information without a warrant. "We need to talk to this Freeman woman," Baxter decided. "Where is she now?" "At a halfway house for ex-cons on the east side of town." When the detectives arrived at the center, they learned that Renee Freeman was absent. She had gone to a job interview and was expected back by evening. "We'll wait," Baxter told the center's supervisor. "It's important." Renee showed up at the center around 6 p.m. When she saw the two detectives in the lobby, she froze for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together and approached them. "Minus, Ms. Freeman?" Baxter showed his badge. "Detectives Baxter and Miller, we need to ask you a few questions." "What's this about?" Renee asked calmly. "Andre Jackson was found dead yesterday morning," Baxter said bluntly, watching her reaction carefully. Renee feigned surprise, but there was no shock or grief in her eyes. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, "but I don't see what it has to do with me." "You were in a relationship with Mr. Jackson before your incarceration, correct?" Miller asked. "That was 4 years ago," Renee replied. "I haven't seen him since." "No contact since his release?" Baxter continued. "None. I had no reason to seek him out." "Where were you last night between midnight and 2 o'clock?" "Here in my room, asleep. You can ask the night watchman." The detectives looked at each other. The alibi was weak. The night watchman couldn't know for sure that Renee had been in her room all night. "Minus Ms. Freeman," Baxter changed tactics. "Have you had a physical examination since your release?" Renee tensed, but her voice remained calm. "Yes, it's a mandatory procedure." "What's this about?" "We have reason to believe that Mr. Jackson's murder may be related to a medical problem. A red bow was found on his body, a symbol of HIV awareness." Renee blinked, but showed no surprise. "And you think I killed him because of that? Why?" "We're not accusing you, Ms. Freeman," Miller interjected. "We're just gathering information. If you don't mind, we'd like to take a sample of your DNA to eliminate you as a suspect." "I need to consult with an attorney," Renee said firmly. "I won't answer any further questions without one." The detectives couldn't insist without more solid evidence. They left their contacts and asked Renee not to leave town. "She's hiding something," Miller said when they got back in the car. "Did you see her reaction to the news of Jackson's death?" "No surprise." "I agree," Baxter nodded. "But we need proof. Check the security cameras around the rehab center from that night, and let's get a warrant for her medical records." Over the next few days, detectives gathered information. Surveillance cameras didn't record Renee leaving the center, but there was a 30-minute interval when the camera at the emergency exit didn't work due to a technical glitch. Medical records confirmed that Renee had indeed been diagnosed with HIV immediately after her release. "The motive is heightened," Baxter observed. "She discovers her status and decides to take revenge on Jackson, perhaps believing him to be indirectly responsible for infecting her by putting her in prison. But we still can't prove she was at the crime scene," Miller reminded her. "The hair found in the car doesn't give an exact DNA match because there isn't enough material. We need to keep an eye on her," Baxter decided. "If she did kill Jackson out of revenge, there's a chance she has other goals." While the detectives were developing their theory, Renee was preparing for the second murder. Malik Turner, an old friend of Andre's, was next on her list. Renee was sure he knew of Andre's plans to frame her, but hadn't warned her when they were still friends. Malik owned a small bar on the south side of town. After a dark past, he seemed to be on the path to reform, but Renee didn't care. In her eyes, he was just as guilty as Andre. For 3 days, she'd watched Malik's bar and routine. Every night he closed the place by himself, counted the register, and was the last to leave through the back door. Perfect opportunity for an attack. Thursday night, Renee took up position in the alley behind the bar. She was better prepared this time. Gloves, hood, mask, and not only a knife, but a gun she'd acquired through old connections. Malik left the bar around 2 in the morning. He locked the door, checked the lock, and headed to his car parked a few meters from the entrance. He was alone, and there wasn't a soul around. Renee approached silently from behind and put the gun to his back. "Don't move, Malik," she said quietly. "And don't scream if you want to live." Malik froze, slowly raising his hands. "The wallet is in my back pocket," he said in a trembling voice. "Take it and go." "I'm not here for the money," Renee pushed him against the wall of the building. "I came to talk about your friend Andre." Malik tensed. as he heard the familiar name. "What? Who are you?" Renee took off her mask, and Malik recognized her despite the years that had passed. "Renee," he whispered incredulously. "What the—" "You knew," she interrupted him. "Knew Andre was going to set me up with the drugs. Knew and didn't warn me." Malik shook his head, his eyes widening with fear. "I didn't know. I swear, Renee, I thought you two were in on it. He never told me he was going to set you up." "Liar!" Renee shouted, hitting him in the face with the handle of her gun. "You're all lying. You were his best friend. He shared all his plans with you. You knew he was setting me up with the drugs. You know what happened to me in prison? I was raped by a guard. And I got HIV, all because of you two." Malik fell to his knees, blood dripping from his split eyebrow. "Renee, listen. I really didn't know he was planning to frame you, I swear. I would have told you we were friends." "Friends?" Renee laughed bitterly. "You never once visited me in prison, never wrote me a single letter. What kind of friend are you?" She kicked him again, this time in the stomach. Malik cringed in pain. "Please," he wheezed. "I can explain everything." Too late. Renee drew her knife. Andre had already paid for his betrayal. Now it's your turn. Malik tried to crawl away, but Renee grabbed him by the collar and stabbed him first. Then a second, a third. She struck with a fury she had never felt even against Andre. Each blow was accompanied by words of hatred and accusations of betrayal. When it was over, Renee stood over Malik's body, breathing heavily. Her hands and clothes were covered in blood. She took his wallet and phone, just as she had done with Andre, mimicking a robbery. Before leaving, Renee left a mark, a small red ribbon bow, a symbol of HIV awareness, which she pinned to Malik's shirt. She left the same bow on Andre's body, but with a different meaning, not because of their HIV status, but as a symbol that their actions had indirectly led to her infection. With this sign, she wanted to say, "I'm not just killing, I'm bringing justice." Renee disappeared into the night, leaving behind the mutilated body of Malik Turner, the second victim on her revenge list. Leading the way was the last one, prison guard Leroy Wilson, whom she held directly responsible for her infection. Malik's body was discovered the next morning. Detectives Baxter and Miller arrived on the scene while forensics were already at work. "Even more brutal than Jackson's," Miller remarked, looking at the multiple stab wounds. The killer was furious. Baxter noticed the red bow on the victim's chest. "The same bow as Jackson's," he said. "Now it's definitely a serial killing." "Shall we see if Turner was HIV positive?" Miller asked. "Yeah, and find out what the connection is between him and Jackson," Baxter said. "I think we're dealing with revenge." In the meeting room of the Somerville Police Department, Detectives Baxter and Miller studied a board of photographs and case notes. 2 photos of the dead men, Andre Jackson and Malik Turner, were connected by a red thread, symbolizing the connection between the murders. "Let's go over it again," Baxter said, tapping his marker on the board. "What do our victims have in common?" Miller stood up and pointed to the pictures. Both victims have drug-related criminal records, both knew Renee Freeman prior to her incarceration, and both had a red bow on their bodies, a symbol of HIV awareness. "The method of murder?" Baxter continued. "Similar, but not identical. Jackson was killed in his car, Turner in the alley behind his bar. Both suffered multiple stab wounds, but Turner was particularly brutal. The killer seemed to get more violent with each victim. Turner's autopsy showed that he, like Jackson, was healthy," Baxter added. "No traces of HIV or other infections." "Then why the red bow? What message does the killer want to send?" Baxter rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Perhaps it has nothing to do with their status, but with what they did to someone with HIV. We know Freeman was diagnosed positive right after she was released. There was a knock on the door, and an officer entered the room. "Detectives, you have a visitor. Says it's urgent, and it concerns your murders." Baxter and Miller looked at each other. "Who is she?" Baxter asked. Dr. Tamara Ellis from the city clinic. A few minutes later, a slender, dark-skinned woman with a short haircut and a concerned expression entered the room. "Thank you for seeing me, detectives," she said, taking a seat in the offered chair. "I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing by violating doctor-patient confidentiality, but after the news of the second murder, I can't keep quiet." "We understand your concern, Dr. Ellis," Baxter replied. "If the information can help prevent more crimes, you're doing the right thing." Dr. Ellis took a deep breath. "This is about Renee Freeman. I've been her primary care physician since her release. 2 weeks ago, I informed her of her positive HIV status. Miller quickly wrote that information down. How did she react? First shock, then denial. The usual reaction to such a diagnosis. But then, she changed. She started asking weird questions about how and when she might have gotten infected, specifically asking if she could have gotten the virus in prison. Did she give any specific names? Baxter asked. Not directly, but she mentioned an ex-boyfriend who, she said, set her up and sent her to prison. And she said something about a prison guard who, Dr. Ellis hesitated, who allegedly abused her. The detectives looked at each other again. That confirmed their theory. "What else made you suspicious, Doctor?" Miller asked. "She missed an important appointment 3 days ago. When I called her, she sounded strangely detached. She said she was dealing with the past and getting justice. And then I heard about the murders and those red bows, a symbol of HIV awareness." Baxter nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Ellis. You've been very helpful to the investigation. We'll be in touch if we need more information." When the doctor left, Baxter turned to Miller. "Now the picture is coming together. Freeman contracted HIV in prison, possibly as a result of abuse by a guard. But she also blames Jackson, who set her up and sent her to prison, and Turner, who probably knew of Jackson's plans and didn't warn her. If that's the case, then this guard should be the next target," Miller concluded. "We need to find him, and fast. Look for the records of the women's correctional facility employees during Freeman's incarceration." Miller was already tapping away on his laptop keyboard. "I'm looking. Here. I found something interesting. Leroy Wilson, fired 2 years ago after several complaints from inmates about inappropriate behavior. Official reason for termination was at will. Address?" Baxter was already putting on his jacket. 27 Oak Street. That's on the west side of town. Request a support team and check Freeman's last known whereabouts. While the detectives mobilized, Renee was in a small rented room on the outskirts of Somerville. She rented it 2 days ago under an assumed name, paying cash a week in advance. The landlord, an elderly man with blind eyes, didn't ask too many questions or ask for identification. On the table in front of Renee was a gun, a knife, and a picture of Leroy Wilson, cut from an old newspaper article about a charity event at the prison. Wilson was smiling into the cell, standing next to the warden of the colony. That fake smile haunted Renee's nightmares for all the years after the attack. She remembered it as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Night shift. Wilson walks into her cell while her cellmate is in the infirmary. His words, "No one would believe someone like you." His heavy breathing, the pain and humiliation. Renee had remained silent then, afraid she wouldn't be believed, that it would affect the possibility of parole. And now she knew that this abuse had not only broken her psychologically, but physically as well, transmitting to her a virus that had changed her entire life. She pulled a red bow out of her bag, the same as the ones she'd left on Andre and Malik's bodies, a symbol of her personal war against those who had taken her future from her. Renee had been studying Wilson's routine for days now. After his discharge from prison, he'd taken a job as a security guard at a downtown nightclub. Every morning at 6 o'clock, finishing his shift, he walked home through the deserted streets. Perfect time and place for an attack. She checked her gun, loaded it, and put it in her jacket pocket. The knife was hidden in a special sheath on her ankle. It was supposed to look like a robbery turned murder, just like the previous cases. But Renee knew this time would be different. Wilson was physically stronger than Andre and Malik, and he was a trained guard who knew how to defend himself. She glanced at her watch. 4 a.m. Time to move out. Detectives Baxter and Miller arrived at Leroy Wilson's house with 2 patrol officers. The door was opened by a sleepy, middle-aged woman. "Mrs. Wilson?" Baxter asked, showing his badge. "We're looking for your husband, Leroy Wilson." "He's at work," the woman replied, pulling up her robe. "What's wrong? When's he coming home?" "He should be here by 6:30 in the morning. His shift ends at 6. Baxter looked at his watch. 5:45. "Where exactly does he work?" "At the Blue Moon Club downtown. He's a security guard there." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Please stay home and call us if your husband contacts you." Back in the car, Baxter contacted dispatch. "Send a patrol to the Blue Moon nightclub. We need to intercept Leroy Wilson when he finishes his shift. And look for Renee Freeman. She's probably already staking out the club." "You think she'll attack tonight?" Miller asked, starting the engine. 2 murders in a week. She's wasting no time. If she knows Wilson's routine, tonight is the perfect opportunity. They drove toward the club, trying to get ahead of a potential attack. Renee took up a position in an alleyway not far from the Blue Moon Club. From here, she had a good view of the service exit through which she had observed Wilson usually left the establishment. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doors of the club opened, and several people came out, bartenders and waiters who had finished their night shift. Among them was Leroy Wilson, still as large and self-assured as in her memories. He said goodbye to his co-workers and headed toward the house, exactly the route Renee had studied beforehand. She followed him, keeping her distance and staying in the shadow of the buildings. After a few blocks, Wilson turned onto a quiet street framed by trees. There were no passers-by here, and most of the windows in the houses remained dark, the perfect place for an attack. Renee quickened her step, shortening the distance between them. Her hand fumbled in her pocket for the handle of her gun. At that moment, a police car appeared on the street, moving slowly in their direction. Renee instantly retreated into the shadows of the entryway, cursing her bad luck. The car passed by, but Wilson, noticing her, quickened his step. He was clearly nervous at the sight of the police, a typical reaction of a man with a guilty conscience. As the patrol car disappeared around the corner, Renee continued her pursuit. Wilson was already 2 blocks from his house. She had to act quickly. Picking a moment when Wilson passed an abandoned building with boarded-up windows, Renee rushed forward. She put the gun to his back and hissed, "Don't make a sound, Wilson. Get inside slowly." The guard froze, but showed no fear, only surprise and anger. "Who are you?" he asked without turning around. "If you want money, just take the wallet." "I want more." Renee pushed him toward the door of the abandoned building. "Come in and you'll find out who I am." It was dark and dusty inside, an old warehouse with high ceilings and concrete columns. Dim light filtered in through the gaps in the boarded-up windows. "Turn around," Renee ordered, holding her gun at the ready. Wilson turned around slowly and his eyes widened with recognition. "Freeman?" he snorted, clearly not taking her as a serious threat despite the gun. "They let you out, huh? What, so you decided to visit an old acquaintance right away?" "You raped me!" Renee's voice shook with rage. "My first night in cell block B, remember?" Wilson grinned contemptuously. "I remember you hanging all over me, hoping you'd get a free pass. Typical story for someone like you." "Liar!" Renee shouted, gripping the gun tighter. "You knew you had HIV, and still, you took everything from me." Wilson's expression changed. Fear flashed in his eyes. "What are you talking about? I don't have HIV. You're crazy." "Tests don't lie," Renee replied coldly. "I found out about my status as soon as I was released, and you're the only one who could have infected me in prison. Look, I don't know who infected you, but it certainly wasn't me." Wilson took a small step back. "Maybe one of your cellmates? Or did you catch it before you went to prison?" "My test was negative on admission," Renee cut him off. "And the only unwanted contact I had in prison was with you." Wilson's eyes widened in realization. So you're the one. Those murders on the news. He swallowed nervously. Look, Renee, you're making a mistake. I'm clean, I swear. You can check my medical records. Too late for excuses. Renee pointed the gun at his chest. I lost everything because of you. The job I could have gotten. The family I could have made. The children I could never have. And before that, because of Andre and Malik, I went to prison where you did this to me. Stop! Wilson shouted, raising his hands. Let's talk! I can help you! At that moment, the sound of approaching cars and voices could be heard outside the warehouse doors. Someone was heading toward the building. Baxter and Miller arrived at the Blue Moon Club only to find that Wilson had already left. They immediately contacted the patrols looking for him on their way home. Anything? Baxter asked nervously over the radio. A man matching the description was seen on Pine Street 5 minutes ago, the officer replied. He had a woman with him. They entered an abandoned building. Address? 17 Pine Street, an old textile factory warehouse. We're going in. Nobody gets in until we get there. The detectives got to the address in record time. 2 squad cars were already parked outside the building. Officers with their guns at the ready awaiting their commands. Any sign of activity inside? Baxter asked. We heard voices, one of the officers replied. A woman was yelling at a man. All right, we're going in. You two come with us, the rest of you block the exits. Baxter and Miller drew their weapons and approached the door. They heard Renee's voice. It's too late for excuses, and Wilson's yell, Stop! Police! Baxter shouted, swinging the door open. Drop your weapons! Renee and Wilson turned around. Detectives and 2 officers entered the room, holding them at gunpoint. Put your weapons on the floor and put your hands up, Miller ordered. Renee gripped the gun tighter, pointing it back and forth at Wilson and the police officers. You don't understand, she said in a shaky voice. He has to pay for what he did. Renee, Baxter stepped forward, lowering the gun. We know what happened. We know about your diagnosis and how you feel. But this is not the answer. A way out? Renee laughed bitterly. There is no way out for me anymore. My life ended the moment, doctor. Ellis told me about HIV. Modern medicine works wonders, Baxter said softly. People with HIV live long and fulfilling lives. You can start over. A fresh start? Renee shook her head. With the stigma of a criminal and an incurable disease, who would want me like that? I do, Miller said suddenly, stepping forward. Not as a suspect, but as a witness. If Wilson did rape you in prison, we can start an investigation. Bring him to justice legally. She's lying, Wilson screamed. There was no rape. She's just crazy. Shut up, Baxter said sharply, not taking his eyes off Renee. Minus Miss Freeman, listen. Killing Wilson won't change anything. It won't cure you or bring back your past. But if you surrender now, you still have a chance for the future. Renee hesitated. Her hand with the gun trembled. You don't understand, she whispered. They were all to blame. Andre set me up with the drugs. He was the reason I ended up in jail. Malik knew what he was planning and didn't warn me. And this one, she nodded at Wilson. He used his position to... Her voice broke and she cried for the first time in a long time. I understand your anger, Baxter said. But there is another way. Trust us. Let justice be done in a legitimate way. Wilson, seeing Renee's confusion, decided to seize the moment. He dashed toward the nearest pillar, trying to take cover. Renee instinctively pointed her gun at him, and at that moment a shot rang out. But it wasn't her who fired. One of the officers, who thought Wilson was attacking, fired first. The bullet grazed Wilson's shoulder, and he fell to the floor, screaming in pain. Hold your fire! Baxter shouted. Everybody stay where you are! Renee froze, looking at the wounded Wilson. The gun in her hand lowered. Just like that? She asked quietly. He'd get shot in the shoulder and then bail out and go on with his life as if nothing had happened? No, Miller said firmly. We're going to do a full investigation. If there really was abuse at the women's colony, if he really was involved, he'll answer to the law. And what will happen to me? Renee asked, looking at the detectives. 2 murders? I'm going away for life? I won't lie to you, it's a serious situation, Baxter replied. But there are mitigating circumstances. Your diagnosis, psychological trauma, possible violence in prison. If you cooperate, if you help us deal with Wilson and the other guards involved in the violence, there could be a different sentence. Renee stared at him for a long time, as if trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Then she slowly put the gun on the floor and raised her hands. I don't regret what I did to Andre and Malik, she said calmly. They deserved their deaths. But if you do punish him, she nodded at Wilson, it might be worth giving up. You're making the right choice, Baxter said as he cautiously approached and cuffed her. Renee Freeman, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murders of Andre Jackson and Malik Turner. While Baxter read her rights, Miller ordered medics for Wilson and began interviewing witnesses. Other officers cordoned off the building, and forensics began collecting evidence. Renee walked calmly toward the police car, surrounded by officers. Her face was impassive, but conflicting emotions raged inside. The revenge she had so carefully planned had gone unfinished. Wilson was alive. But perhaps a punishment worse than death awaited him: public exposure, trial, prison. As she was being put into the car, Renee saw Wilson being carried out on a stretcher. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw fear in his gaze. He knew that she had told the police, and he realized that his reputation and freedom were now at stake. "Detective," she called out to Baxter as he was about to close the car door. "There's a diary in my room at the rehab center under my mattress. I used to write down everything that happened in prison, names, dates, everything Wilson and the other guards did. It might help in your investigation." Baxter nodded. "We'll find him, and if what you're saying is true, believe me, Wilson and the other guilty parties will get what they deserve." He closed the door and the police car started up. Renee looked out the window at the dawn sky of Somerville. The town was waking up, unaware of the drama that had played out in the old warehouse. Her revenge hadn't been finalized the way she'd planned, but perhaps the justice the detectives promised would be a worthy alternative. That evening, Baxter and Miller sat in the office studying Renee's diary found at the halfway house. What they read shocked even seasoned detectives. "If half of this is true," Baxter said grimly, "there was hell going on at the women's colony. And Wilson wasn't the only one involved," Miller added. "At least 3 other guards and even the deputy warden have been mentioned." "Let's start a full-scale investigation," Baxter decided. "This goes far beyond the Freeman case. There's a whole system of violence and abuse." "What's going to happen to her?" Miller asked. "She did kill 2 people after all." Baxter looked thoughtfully at the picture of Renee from her file. "I'll talk to the prosecutor. Given the circumstances and her cooperation, she might be able to avoid a life sentence, but it's not exactly an easy outcome." "She knew what she was getting into," Miller said, "when she decided to take justice into her own hands." "Yeah," Baxter agreed. "But sometimes the system pushes people to extremes, especially those who feel betrayed and forgotten." They continued to study the diary, realizing that the Renee Freeman case was only the tip of the iceberg, hiding much larger crimes. And in the holding cell, Renee sat on a narrow bunk, staring out the small, barred window. A strange calmness filled her. For the first time in a long time, she felt that her voice was being heard, that her pain was being recognized. Whatever happened next, a long sentence, probation, or something in between, she knew that her story would not go unrecognized. And perhaps, thanks to her, other women would avoid the fate she had suffered.